Hello, I'm Patty Lyons, and today we're here to talk about picking up the right number of stitches for you every single time. One of the problems with picking up stitches is if we follow a pattern exactly, sometimes we pick up stitches and it ends up too ruffled or too tight. That's because either our stitch gauge might vary from the pattern, our row gauge might vary from the pattern, or we might have altered the pattern. We might have lengthened a garment or lowered or raised a neckline. So today we're going to talk about how to check if the pattern is right for you and how to ignore the pattern if you've altered it or if your stitch or row gauge is off. The first thing we're going to need is our gauge of whatever is the band that we're adding. So we'll need also a good ruler, and I like some little sharp object to stab. Now, a lot of knitters might feel comfortable picking up stitches or altering how many stitches they pick up in a straight front cardigan because it's easy to measure a straight line. But how do we recalculate a curve? Well, that's when we want to divide and conquer. I'm going to need to know the stitch gauge of whatever edge stitch I'm putting on, and I'm also going to need to know my stitch multiple. Now, in the example I'm using for the Roselle tee, it is a reverse stockinette edging, so multiple is not an issue. But if it's a multiple of 2 or a multiple of 4 plus 2, if you're doing rib, you're going to need to calculate the number of stitches you pick up and then tweak that for the multiple. Now let's take a look at my edge. Now, one nice thing is a lot of times the edge of your sweater will be the same as the stitches that you're picking up for the band. Now here I have reverse stockinette and I have measured 4 inches and I've counted up the stitches and I know I have 25 stitches in 4 inches. That's when dividing and conquering comes into play. Now I love using little coilless safety pins. I particularly love them when they come in all these nifty colors and when they're plastic coated. Now the first thing I've done is I've put a locking stitch marker at each corner, and then I've folded the whole piece in half and I've put a locking stitch marker right in the middle. After that, what I like to do is I like to mark out the area of my center bind off. Let me just zoom in a tiny bit to show you what I mean. So here I have the stitches that are all bound off at the center neck in the series of bind offs. I have a center bind off and then I have another couple bind offs. And you're going to always see this lovely little hole, which is when you transition from binding off to decreasing. Pop a locking stitch marker right in that hole. The reason I want to mark out these stitches is all of these are going to be picked up at a rate of 1 stitch to 1 stitch. Easy peasy. But this curve is what I want to calculate. So what I'm going to do is take this area and I'm going to fold that in half and again divide and conquer, put a locking stitch marker. So now that I have that charted out, what I want to do is I want to figure out if the pattern is right for me. So I have in my pattern that I have to pick up 27 stitches between this shoulder and the bind off. And then I'm going to be picking up 31 in the 1-to-1. So now that I have it kind of this curve sectioned off into more like straight sections, it's a lot easier to measure. So now what I can do is take a ruler to that section, and I know that I'm getting 25 stitches inside every 4 inches, and I know I need to pick up 27 stitches. So if I take a look, that works out nicely for me because there I'm at 25 and I can just pick up 26, 27. So now I need to figure out how many stitches am I going to skip. Because stitch and row gauge are different, I know I simply can't pick up one stitch for every row. Well, knowing that I have 25 stitches in 4 inches means I can stab it out to plan it out. So I'm going to stab out every available space. So the spaces that I'm going into is that column right there between the last completed knit stitch and the final completed knit stitch. And that's where I'm going to stab out to plan. So I'm just going to hold it up here so that you can see a little better. So forgive the ruler getting a little wiggly and jiggly. It's a little tricky doing it holding, but let me just get it set. Okay. So there's going to be those last two. There's the hole. You never pick up in a hole. So I know there's going to be my last two. So here's the spaces that I'm stabbing out. So I'm counting out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just move my hand out of the way. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Actually, I can let go of the ruler at this point. 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, and I could put one right in the corner, 28. So that means in that area where I'm going to pick up 25 stitches, 3 of them I'm going to skip. So it's kind of an easy peasy situation. You don't have to go crazy. Here my stitch and row gauge are a little closer linked than some say standard Aran weight yarns. But if I know I have to skip 3 stitches within 25, I never want to skip them at the shoulder. I want that shoulder nice and solid. So not a big deal. I might just pick up 8, skip, 8, skip, 8, skip. So I know how many stitches I'm picking up around that curve. Done. So say you had lowered a neckline, raised a neckline. Say you had lengthened a sweater. Knit your edge stitch. Yes, that means if your edge stitch isn't the same as the bottom of a sweater, you know, like it is here, that means, yes, another swatch, you'll live. Knit a little swatch of your edge stitch. Block it exactly as you'd like it. And that's one nice thing is you can figure out how stretched out, how tighten up if it's rib. Measure it. You will know how many stitches you are getting inside of 4 inches. After that, divide and conquer. You're going to take either a straight line for a cardigan or something like this sweater, fold it in half, locking stitch marker. Make sure to mark out all the stitches that are straight pickup. And from there, it's easy peasy. Now that I've plotted out my pickup and I know exactly how many stitches I'm picking up in each section, I can just dive right in. So if we remember, for me, I need to pick up 27 stitches between my little shoulder marker and my neck marker. And I also stabbed it out to plan it out so I know how many stitches I'm skipping and where. Now the space that I'm going is right there between that last clean decrease and that edge stitch. So I'm going to insert in, wrap my yarn around, and pull through. And remember, I know I'm going to pick up 8 and skip. So here I go. I have 1. And one little trick I can do is I can pick up the second stitch with the tail. Makes for a nice, neat, clean pickup. Then you can drop the tail and continue. So there I have 1, 2, 3, 4. Just going to zoom in a tiny bit more here. See if we can keep my focus. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. And there's 5, 6, 7, and remember, I'm going to skip 8, and then I'll skip. Now, don't worry if you feel like, oh, there's a gap. It's so obvious. When you knit this up, you won't be able to tell. So there's my 8, skip. 9, 10, 11, 'll meet you around the bend. 12, 22, 23, so remember I'm going to skip again. 24, because I was going to skip 8. I was going to skip every 8 stitches, 24. So then I'm going to skip again. 25, 26, and look at that, lo and behold, because we stabbed it out to plan it out, no stress, I'm exactly where I need to be for the 27th stitch. Now, because you never pick up in a hole, but rather on either side of a hole, actually going to get rid of this. Now is when I begin my 31 stitches along that neck edge, and that is just 1 stitch to 1 stitch. So when I skip that hole, I'm going right through the heart of every stitch of the bind off, and that will automatically be 31. So there's not much to picking up stitches once you know a couple tiny secrets. Figure out your stitch gauge, divide and conquer, measure, and stab it out to plan it out. That's it. Enjoy.